Kevin here with etrailer, and today we're going to be showing you how to install the Roadmaster rear anti-sway bar here on our 2023 Ford F-53 chassis. Now when you're loading up the family and you're heading out on your trip, typically with a motorhome, you're probably driving a good amount of time, maybe spending about 8+ hours out there. So you really want to make sure that you're having a nice, comfortable ride quality. You don't want to feel like you're on the boat out in the ocean and you're getting that side-to-side seasickness for the whole family. So there's a few things that you can do to help mitigate that issue. The biggest one is going to be adding in a rear anti-sway bar. Now in most motorhomes, they're typically not going to even have one on the back, but in this case ours did today, and this was in addition to it, so this is going to help shore up our frame even better. Now an anti-sway bar is basically a giant spring, and what this is going to do is want to retain its shape. So as that weight shifts between the two frame rails on your motorhome, that spring is going to want to pull itself right back to straight and help eliminate all that sway. So when it comes to the installation, this is a pretty simple one on paper, but actually doing it can be quite a challenge depending on the age of your motorhome. If you are looking into getting one of these and you plan on doing it yourself, go get yourself a couple cans of penetrating oil and start soaking those well in advance. Get yourself a wire brush, and you can also help scrape out some of the corrosion that starts to build up in those threads. The cleaner you can get them, the easier this install is going to be for you, because once you get that in, all you have to do is add on a couple brackets on your frame rail and then some end links, and it's going to be a pretty simple install at that point. Now, if you feel like this is going to be a little bit too much, or maybe you're not going to have the torque wrench that's going to be required in order to torque those U-bolts back down, please feel free to use our dealer locator. You can enter in your zip code and find a shop near you to get it professionally installed. Now, if you have all the time to do this and the tools to do so, then please stick around and I'll walk you through the process. To start off our install, we are going to chalk our front wheels on our motorhome, and then we're going to be setting up our lifts at the back of it so that we can lift the motorhome up by the frame, because the first two things that we're going to pop out are some bolts so that we can install our frame brackets. And these are going to be the cross member that's behind the rear axle, and to get enough room in there so that you can actually get a socket on those two bolt heads, you're going to need to lift up by the frame, and that's going to create separation from the leaf spring stack, which is typically going to be sitting in front of it when the full weight of the body is up on the suspension. So like I said, we've lifted it up. Make sure that you have some jack stands under there just for your safety, and then like I said, just double check, make sure that you have those front wheels chalked, so that way there's no way it can start rolling on you or slip at all. And then I'm going to get under there with an impact. Typically on a lot of these motorhomes, especially like the larger Class A's, there's a lot of room in the wheel well for me to just kind of get into and do my work, but unfortunately on this one, it's just super tight with the body here. I can't get myself in there, so we're going to be under the motorhome, and I'm going to have my impact up, and I'm going to have a long extension so that way I can actually reach it up over our leaf spring stack. So if you are going to be under there and you're using an impact, make sure that you also have some hearing protection. Put those in, because it's pretty loud under there and you don't need to damage your ears. So get under there and get this started. Once you get those bolts loose, you're going to see you have a nut or a flange nut here with a little tab that's on it. And that tab is going to roll around until it hits the cross tube and then stop, and it's going to act as a weld nut for us. So once we slap this up into the frame, we'll put our hardware back through, this nut will go on, we're going to tighten those down, and then we'll also have to torque it. And getting the torque wrench in there is also a challenge, so that's going to be something where we'll have to play with it a little bit. I'll probably have to kind of be under here instead of up over the wheel well like I was really wanting to do with the torque wrench. So we'll get these slotted in. Now that we have these snug down, I'm going to torque them to the specifications listed in the instructions. And to do so, I'm using a 5-inch extension with a deep well socket, and that's getting me clear of the leaf springs pack, and I have the torque wrench on the inside of our wheels here. And that one's good. All right, now that we got this side done, we're just going to repeat that same process over on our driver's side as well. For our next step, we're going to be installing our axle plate, and it's going to require us to remove our U-bolts. Now we have enough space that we can get that axle plate in and still have some threads left over. If you're looking at this and you maybe don't have enough threads to get that on plus the nut, then it's time to look into some new U-bolts, which you can get from Roadmaster. Originally our neighbor had ordered them too, and I looked at it, but they're going to be a little bit too long for our setup on this one. But big thing here is really just get rid of all of that corrosion that you can. So I've been soaking these in penetrating oil for about an hour now, and I like to come back and just get as much of this out of the threads as I can with a wire brush. That's going to make it so much easier to get the nut back off. And then when we have to put it back on with the axle plate, then we're not sitting there struggling and getting bound up by some rust or corrosion stuck on the threads. Now that I've let these soak for a bit and I've brushed them a couple times and reapplied more penetrating oil, we're going to knock off each one of these axle U-bolt nuts. And then be careful, this guy right here, this bottom plate's super heavy and it's going to want to just drop right on you. Typically what you can do is just kind of get it at a little bit of an angle on the U-bolts and it'll kind of hold itself up, but definitely do not be under it because it can come crashing down on you really easily. But once that's out of the way, each one of those nuts, we're going to slap up our tie plate, and I've got it over on the driver's side already so that you can see which direction we want this to go. So we're going to have that pointed section facing backwards because the sway bar is going to have the mounts right here, and it's going to come around our rear differential, and then we'll have our end links match right up with those frame brackets that we put in when we disconnected those two bolts from the cross member here. So make sure that you have this facing towards the rear of the vehicle. That way everything will line up perfectly. Now as I'm doing this, I'm also going to do just a little bit at a time and move around. I don't want to put so much pressure on one nut that it just pinches it too tight and then we can't get it off. Now we're going to get our plate in place, and then this is something where you're going to have to kind of play with it and wiggle it back and forth because the U-bolts like to allow that bottom plate to kind of drop out. Let's start a couple threads on this. That should help hold us a little bit. Alright, I'm going to snug these up a little bit more with my impact here just because it is pinching a whole bunch. Just work your way around, make sure that you're evenly doing this back and forth. So I kind of like to do like a cross pattern just to make sure it's evenly tightening down. That way we're not getting one side getting more tight than the other and everything gets a little crooked here. Now that we have it all snugged down, we'll come back with our torque wrench. Now this is going to be a torque wrench that you're not typically going to have at home. So it is this big guy right here. This is well above your typical torque wrench rating. So this isn't something you'd probably be able to even buy at a store unless you're at a specialty mechanics store. So I would definitely make sure that you reach out. You can use our dealer locator and you can find a shop that can get these on for you. Maybe they don't do the whole entire install for you. Maybe you just want them to do just this, slap these on, save yourself the headache because the rest of this is going to be super easy and something that you could probably do at home because we're not going to be using anything kind of crazy and that torque setting is going to get a lot lower to where it's more in that typical range of something you can pick up at a hardware store or even just rent from an auto parts store. So I'm going to get this all set up. We'll get torquing on all four of these and then once you have this side done, make sure that you just repeat everything over on the other side as well and then we can start getting our bracket for the front here and get our sway bar mounted up in place. For this next part, we're going to be dropping in our smaller bronze bolts here. We're gonna be putting a flat washer on that first. We'll drop it in from the top, and there's gonna be 4 holes on our plate, but we're gonna want that first one and the third one. And if you look, the 2 holes for different setups here are gonna be spaced either further out or further in. And the ones we're going with are gonna be the ones that are further in, closest to the center. So we'll get those 2, and that's gonna butt up with our D-shaped bracket right here. And once we get that up into place with our sway bar, we're gonna have another flat washer that's gonna go on each of these bolts, and then a lock nut to finish it off. So before we can get to that point, we are going to need to lube up our bushings. And in your kit, you're gonna find this little guy right here, some green lubricant. And we're gonna take about half of it, because half's gonna go in this one, the other half in this guy over here. And you'll definitely wanna have an extra set of gloves ready to go once you get this done, because this stuff is very sticky and kinda gets everywhere. And then we can stick it on our sway bar. Now if you look at the bottom of these have a split in them so that they can go over the top of it. Right here. So I like to put these on first before changing out my gloves, so that way I don't have to change them out multiple times here. So we will pop that right on. When it comes to the orientation of our sway bar, we want to make sure that we have this with Roadmaster facing out towards the rear of the motorhome. And you can see the bend in it where it's going to go around the rear differential. So we want to make sure that we have this sitting correctly with that bend kind of going down and also coming more towards the rear. I'm going to use a strap. I just threw it up over the frame rail on this side just to help hold it up in place while I work on the other side. Makes it a little bit easier if you're doing this on your own. We'll take our D-shaped bracket. And then we can, once we have that up, you can grip the bracket right here and then the top bracket, and that'll help hold it in place a little bit easier for you. Get one of the lock nuts started. Come over on the other side, do the same. And then the same thing over on our driver's side. Now we can come back with our torque wrench, torque it to the specs listed in the instructions. Now we're going to be taking our 5/8 hardware and our end links, and this is going to be just that bolt and lock nut, and we're going to be slotting it through with the bolt head facing out towards the outside of the vehicle and the threads facing in towards the center. For our end links, I've already played around with the driver's side to get it set exactly how we want it, but the big goal here is to essentially be parallel with our frame rail. So we want to go with the top and then center on our end link. So we'll slot in our first bolt. Grab our second. There we go. We'll snug down these lock nuts, and we're not actually going to torque this. We're going to go until it starts to pinch on the bushings, and you can see it. I'll move out of the way so you guys can as I start to tighten it down. In the description, they tell you until it starts to deform them, but you can kind of see them slightly compress a little bit once the end link really clamps down on it, and that's what we're going for. And we're going to be using a 15/16 socket and wrench. All right, as we get closer here, you'll start to see compresses. It's probably hard to see on the camera, but I can see it squeezing in against our end here. And we're going to stop right at that. We don't want to go anymore because this does have to be able to kind of move back and forth. So as your suspension compresses and decompresses, this needs to roll with it. Otherwise, it's just going to rip it right out. So we'll do the same thing up top. Once this is all installed, you definitely want to come back every once in a while, maybe before your trip if you're not someone who's taking multiple a month, and just double check your torque setting on all the rest of the bolts. So these guys right here, your U-bolts, and then just come back here, and we're not checking for torque just because we didn't actually torque it. We're just making sure that it is clamped down tight on our bushings, but not too tight to where it's not going to be able to sway back and forth as the suspension compresses and decompresses. Well, that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the Roadmaster rear anti-sway bar here on our 2023 Ford F-53 chassis. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right anti-sway bar for your F-53 chassis, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.